Above the quaint, white church, the summer sky yawned, an endless canvas of blue, punctuated by fluffy clouds that resembled airborne cotton. Perched gently atop a verdant knoll, the church oversaw a boundless expanse of rolling fields, their edges defined by venerable oak trees, silent sentinels of generations past. A well-worn gravel path snaked its way up to the church doors, juxtaposed against which, a gleaming black car seemed jarringly out of place in this rustic tableau. Inside, the church pulsed with life that Saturday, every pew occupied by guests adorned in their finest attire, gathered for the highly anticipated wedding of Thomas and Rebecca Henderson. It was the kind of event that had set tongues wagging in the town for months. Thomas, the scion of one of the county's wealthiest families, had amassed a considerable fortune in real estate by his early 30s. No expense had been spared. Exotic flowers, flown in from distant states, graced the venue, and the reception, slated for the country club, was rumored to have cost more than many locals earned in a year. Among the assembled guests sat Caroline Mitchell, a 28-year-old woman with long flaxen hair cascading down her shoulders. Her face, though possessing the potential for striking beauty, bore the indelible mark of anxiety. She wore a simple white dress, delicate yet unmistakably modest, and occupied a seat near the rear of the church, her young daughter nestled by her side. Grace, a 5-year-old miniature of her mother, sported a shorter version of Caroline's blonde hair and possessed wide, inquisitive blue eyes that eagerly absorbed the world around her. Dressed in a cream-colored frock lovingly hand-stitched by Caroline, who had sacrificed countless nights to perfect its embroidery and lace trim, Grace clutched a well-worn stuffed rabbit, her steadfast companion since infancy, and leaned trustingly against her mother. Caroline had harbored deep reservations about attending this wedding. When the invitation arrived 2 months prior, she had nearly declined. But Rebecca, the bride, had been her college roommate before life's unpredictable currents had pulled them apart. Their bond had been strong, until Caroline's unexpected pregnancy led to her dropping out of school. Her life had since veered onto a path of dual jobs and raising Grace alone in a humble apartment on the town's periphery. Rebecca, having reconnected via social media, had insisted on Caroline's presence at the wedding. "I want you there," she'd written. "You were such an integral part of my life, and I want to share this milestone with you." And so Caroline had acquiesced, despite the financial strain of the 2-hour drive to the church, the prospect of facing judgment from her past acquaintances, and the nagging feeling of being an outsider among these affluent guests and their ostentatious displays of wealth. The ceremony unfolded with grace and beauty. Rebecca radiated joy in a gown that likely exceeded the value of Caroline's car. The vows were traditional and heartfelt, and the congregation erupted in applause as Thomas sealed the union with a kiss. Caroline joined in the applause, genuinely happy for Rebecca, yet simultaneously stung by the memory of her own unrealized dreams. Following the ceremony, the guests streamed out of the church, eager to capture the moment with photographs before heading to the lavish reception. Caroline, hand in hand with Grace, intended to slip away unnoticed. She had fulfilled her obligation, made her appearance. Now she could retreat back to her life. But as she made her way towards her battered Honda in the gravel parking lot, a voice called out, "Caroline! Caroline Mitchell!" She turned to find an older woman approaching, her age likely in the mid-60s, her steel-gray hair coiffed to perfection, and her dress exuding affluence. It took Caroline a moment to place her, then recognition dawned. Mrs. Henderson, Thomas's mother. Caroline had encountered her briefly at a college event years ago. "Mrs. Henderson," Caroline greeted politely, subtly shielding Grace behind her. "Congratulations. It was a beautiful ceremony." Mrs. Henderson's smile failed to reach her eyes. "Yes, it was. I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here, Caroline. I wasn't aware you were still in contact with Rebecca." There was an undercurrent in her tone that made Caroline's stomach clench. "We reconnected recently. She was kind enough to invite us." Mrs. Henderson's gaze dropped to Grace, who peeked out from behind her mother's legs. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I see. And this is your daughter?" "Yes. Caroline replied, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. This is Grace. How old is she? 5. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly, a calculating glint in her eyes. And her father? He's not with you? Caroline's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure. No, ma'am. It's just the two of us. A pregnant silence filled the air, and Caroline sensed the growing attention of the other guests, their conversations fading as they detected the tension between the two women. I see, Mrs. Henderson finally said, her voice laced with frost. Well, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Caroline. This is a family celebration, a sacred occasion. We were unaware that Rebecca had extended an invitation to someone in your situation. Surely you understand that we must maintain certain standards, especially at such an important event. Caroline felt the words strike her like a physical blow. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. But she did understand all too well, and the realization made her nauseous. Mrs. Henderson's face hardened, shedding any pretense of politeness. I mean that this is a church event, a celebration of marriage and family values. Your presence here with a child born out of wedlock is inappropriate. It sends the wrong message to our guests, particularly the younger ones. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The words hung in the air, shocking in their blatant cruelty. Caroline heard gasps from nearby guests, and her face burned with humiliation. Grace pressed closer, sensing her mother's distress, even if she couldn't comprehend the adult conversation. Mrs. Henderson, Caroline began, struggling to keep her voice steady. I was invited here. Rebecca wanted me to come. I haven't done anything wrong. You've brought shame into a house of God. Mrs. Henderson retorted sharply. Now, please leave before you cause a scene and ruin my son's wedding day. Caroline fought back tears, refusing to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She was about to turn and retreat with what remained of her dignity when a voice sliced through the tension like a knife. That's enough. All heads swiveled towards the speaker. A man stood a few yards away, and Caroline recalled having noticed him during the ceremony. He had been seated near the front on the groom's side, but she hadn't paid him much attention beyond registering his rugged good looks, dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and the impeccable fit of his navy suit. Probably in his late 30s, he exuded an air of confidence and authority. His name was Daniel Thornton, though Caroline didn't know that yet. Daniel was Thomas Henderson's business partner and best man. He had known Thomas for a decade, since their first real estate venture, and had watched with growing dismay as his friend had become increasingly subservient to his overbearing mother. Daniel had been walking to his car when Mrs. Henderson's harsh words reached him, and something inside him had snapped. He had witnessed too many instances of the wealthy and powerful treating others as if they were inherently inferior. Having been raised by a struggling single mother, he vividly remembered the sting of being looked down upon for not conforming to society's narrow standards of respectability. He strode towards them, his expression stern. Mrs. Henderson, I am ashamed to be associated with what I just heard. This woman was invited here by your daughter-in-law. She is a guest and deserves to be treated with respect. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed with anger. Daniel, this is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I see someone being humiliated in front of an entire church, Daniel stated firmly. And when I see a child made to feel unwelcome due to circumstances beyond her control, that concerns me a great deal. He turned to Caroline, his gaze softening. I apologize for what you've just experienced. You shouldn't have been subjected to such treatment. No one should. Tears now streamed down Caroline's face, tears of relief mingling with humiliation. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel turned back to Mrs. Henderson. If you insist on this woman and her daughter leaving, I will leave with them, and I will ensure everyone here knows exactly why, including Rebecca, who I imagine will be devastated to learn that her guest was ejected from her wedding by her new mother-in-law. Mrs. Henderson's face paled, then reddened. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Daniel said quietly, his voice unwavering. The standoff stretched, feeling like an eternity, yet likely lasting only seconds. Finally, Mrs. Henderson spun on her heel and stalked away, her back ramrod straight with fury. Daniel watched her retreat, then turned back to Caroline. "Are you all right?" Caroline wiped her eyes, attempting to compose herself. "I don't know. I should probably leave anyway. I don't want to cause any further trouble." "You didn't cause any trouble," Daniel insisted. "Someone else did that. But if you wish to leave, I understand. May I at least escort you to your car?" Caroline nodded, too drained to argue. She lifted Grace, who wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and buried her face in Caroline's shoulder. Daniel walked alongside them across the gravel parking lot. Upon reaching Caroline's car, he waited as she secured Grace in her booster seat. The little girl looked up at him with curious eyes. "Are you a good man?" Grace asked suddenly, her innocent voice cutting through the stillness of the afternoon. Daniel smiled, a transformation that softened his features and made him appear younger. "I try to be," he replied. "Are you okay?" "Mama's sad," Grace observed. "That lady was mean." "Yes, she was," Daniel agreed. "But your mama is very strong, and she loves you very much. That's the most important thing." Grace seemed to ponder this, then nodded sagely before returning her attention to her stuffed rabbit. Caroline gently closed the car door and turned to face Daniel. "Thank you for what you did back there. You didn't have to stand up for us." "Yes, I did," Daniel said simply. "Look, I know we've just met, but would you mind if I gave you my phone number? I'd like to ensure you and Grace are okay. If that's all right." Caroline hesitated, wary of men who offered assistance, unsure of their motives. But there was a sincerity in Daniel's eyes that suggested he wanted nothing more than to do the right thing. "Okay," she said quietly. Daniel produced a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. Caroline's eyes widened as she read it. "Thorn Development Corporation? That's my company," Daniel explained. "I'm a real estate developer, which I know might make you think I'm exactly like the people who just treated you horribly, but I promise I'm not." Caroline managed a faint smile. "The fact that you stood up for us tells me you're not like them at all." She got into her car and drove away, watching Daniel recede in her rearview mirror as he stood in the parking lot, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. The story should have ended there. Caroline should have returned home, banished the unpleasant experience to the depths of her memory, and never given Daniel Thornton another thought. But life rarely adheres to such neat resolutions. 2 days later, Caroline's phone rang while she was working her shift at the local diner. She didn't recognize the number but answered it anyway during her break. "Caroline, this is Daniel Thornton. We met at the wedding on Saturday." "I remember," Caroline replied, surprised. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I obtained your number from Rebecca. I wanted to check on you and Grace, to make sure you were doing all right after what transpired." Their conversation lasted 20 minutes, culminating in Daniel inviting Caroline and Grace to lunch that weekend. "No pressure," he assured her. "Just an opportunity to have a more pleasant experience with someone from that wedding. And I promise, no judgment, no strings attached. Just lunch." Caroline accepted, unsure why, except for an undeniable sense of trust that Daniel evoked. That lunch led to another and then another. Daniel took them to parks and casual diners, places where Caroline felt at ease. He never flaunted his wealth or made her feel inferior because of her circumstances. He inquired about her life, her aspirations, and listened attentively as she recounted the struggles of single motherhood and juggling multiple jobs. More importantly, he was wonderful with Grace, treating her with the same respect he showed adults, soliciting her opinions, listening to her kindergarten stories, and eliciting peals of laughter with silly jokes. Grace, usually reserved around strangers, warmed to him almost immediately. Weeks morphed into months, and the initial friendship gradually blossomed into something deeper. Daniel learned of Caroline's past, about the man who had promised forever but vanished upon learning of her pregnancy, about her decision to drop out of college to raise Grace, about her own family's rejection due to their shame, about her unwavering determination to provide for her daughter, even with limited resources. And Caroline learned about Daniel, About his childhood with a single mother who had worked tirelessly to keep them afloat. About his arduous journey of building his company from scratch. About his unwavering belief that success was meaningless unless used to uplift others. 6 months after that fateful wedding, Daniel escorted Caroline and Grace to a cozy Italian restaurant. After dinner, he knelt before Grace. "Grace," he said earnestly, "I love your mom very much, and I love you too. I'd like to ask your mom to marry me, but first I need to know if that would be okay with you. Would it be all right if I became part of your family?" Grace gazed at him with her solemn blue eyes, then broke into a radiant smile. "Yes. Can I be a flower girl?" Daniel laughed, his face awash with relief and joy. "Absolutely." He then turned to Caroline, presented a ring box, and formally proposed. Caroline, tears streaming down her face, accepted, knowing that she was embracing not just a proposal, but the life she had always yearned for. A life where she was valued and cherished, not despite her past, but because of it. A life where Grace would flourish, embraced by a man who had chosen to love her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. Their wedding was an intimate affair, held in a garden, surrounded by close friends and family. Rebecca, having divorced Thomas and his toxic mother within a year, attended, offering a heartfelt hug and expressing her gratitude that Caroline had attended that first wedding, despite its initial difficulties. As Caroline stood beside Daniel, with Grace beaming in her flower girl dress, her heart swelled. She remembered the day at the church and Mrs. Henderson's cruel words, but she thought of Daniel and how he could have stayed silent. One act of kindness changed everything, and the worst day of her life somehow led to the best. Years later, when Grace was older and asked about how her parents met, Caroline and Daniel told her the whole story. They didn't hide the painful parts or pretend the world was always kind, but they also taught her that sometimes when you're at your lowest point, that's when the most important people step into your life. Daniel's company grew, and he used his resources to fund housing programs for single mothers, scholarships for students who'd had to drop out of school, and support systems for families in need. He never forgot what it felt like to watch his mother struggle or to see Caroline sitting on that gravel road with her daughter, being told she wasn't good enough, and Caroline finished her degree while raising Grace, eventually becoming a social worker who specialized in helping young mothers navigate the challenges she'd once faced. She spoke at churches and community centers about judgment and grace, about how easy it is to condemn and how much harder, but more important it is to show compassion. The little white church where it all began still stands on that gentle rise, surrounded by green fields and old oak trees. Mrs. Henderson is no longer part of the congregation, having moved away after her son's divorce. But the pastor there now tells a different story about that summer day. A story about a man who stood up for what was right, about a mother and daughter who maintained their dignity in the face of cruelty, about how love shows up sometimes in unexpected moments and changes everything. Love showed up that day outside the country church. Not the romantic kind, not at first, but the kind of love that sees someone in pain and chooses to care. The kind that steps forward when others step back. The kind that changes lives and builds families and makes the world a little bit better than it was before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that kind of love grows into something even more beautiful, into partnership and commitment, and the daily choice to show up for each other through all the challenges and joys that life brings. That's what Caroline and Daniel built together. A life based not on judgment or shame, but on grace and second chances and the profound belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter their circumstances. And it all started because one person refused to stay silent when he saw something wrong because he remembered where he'd come from and chose to use his privilege to protect rather than to judge. That's the kind of courage that changes everything. That's the kind of love that lasts.